The chamber had no windows. It never did. 11 species had agreed on that 4,000 years ago when they built the place. Windows made you think about the outside. The outside made you think about things you hadn't decided yet. The conclave did not like undecided things. Yael Davan sat in the gallery and watched the end of the world get processed as paperwork. She had a coffee, cold, had been cold for an hour. She kept almost drinking it and then not. The cup sat in her hands like something she was holding on to for someone else. Below her on the floor, the 11 delegations sat in their curved rows. The chamber was built like a throat, wide at the back, narrowing toward the speaker's platform at the front. Every voice aimed at the same point. Every vote aimed at the same point. That was always the design. Counselor Vrethana of the Keth stood at the platform. He was old, by Keth standards, which meant he looked like stone that had learned to move. Gray skin, slow eyes, the kind of face that had spent 60 years making decisions and had stopped apologizing for any of them. He wore his ceremonial seal on a chain at his chest, and he did not touch it while he spoke. He didn't need to. He was sure of what he was saying. He had been sure of things for a very long time. "The modeling is complete," he said. His voice was low and flat, the way a judge's voice goes flat when the verdict is already written. 3 independent bodies, 3 separate simulation chains. The convergence window is unchanged. 40 years at minimum, 90 at maximum. After that point, the variable is no longer manageable. The variable. That was the word he used. Filed it in the part of her brain she used for things she would think about later. In the dark, when there was nothing to do about them. The variable was 8 billion people. She almost drank the coffee. Didn't. Vrethana continued. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The chamber was built to carry every word, and the chamber was doing its job. The species designated H7 has demonstrated expansion rates inconsistent with stable integration. Their weapons development curve exceeds every prior applicant to conclave membership by a factor we have not seen in recorded history. This is not a judgment of character. He paused. It is a judgment of mathematics. One of the other delegates, a Suri, broad and low to the ground, skin the color of old copper, leaned toward its neighbor and made a sound Yale's translator rendered as procedurally correct. The neighbor nodded its long head. Below her, right below her, 11 species deciding. She had been their liaison for 9 years. She had sat in this gallery for 9 years. She had learned their languages, their customs, which delegates drank what, and which ones didn't drink anything, and which ones found human eye contact aggressive, and which ones found it a sign of respect. 9 years of making herself small and useful and legible to them. 9 years of being very carefully not a threat. Vrethana reached the part she had been waiting for. The motion before this body is designation of Earth as a Class 9 existential volatility. Recommended action, total biospheric suppression. He looked up from his document. He looked at the chamber. This designation has been used twice in our recorded history. Both applications were correct. Both prevented what the simulations projected. We are not a body that acts rashly. We are a body that acts when the evidence is sufficient. He set the document down. The evidence is sufficient. Yael looked at her coffee. The debate lasted another 40 minutes. She listened to all of it. A Sen delegate raised the question of timeline. Could observation continue for another decade? Vrethana answered that the risk curve increased 17% per year of delay. A Marith delegate asked about contact protocols. Could terms be offered? A younger Keth, sitting 3 rows from the front, actually turned and looked up at the gallery for a moment. At Yael. She looked back at him. He looked away first. The answer to the contact question was that contact had been ongoing for 60 years and had not produced a stable trajectory. The humans kept changing. That was the problem, stated plainly, without cruelty. The humans changed faster than any agreement could keep up with. You made terms with one version of them, and 20 years later you were dealing with something the terms didn't cover. You could not make peace with something you couldn't solve. Yale had heard this argument before. In smaller rooms, quieter voices. She had made counter-arguments, good ones, and they had been heard and filed and answered politely, and nothing had changed. That was the thing about the conclave. It listened. It considered. It processed everything through the same converging throat and reached the same point every time. The vote was called. 11 delegations. 11 hands, or appendages, or whatever each species used, raised in sequence, around the curved rows, slow and formal, and not unkind. 11-0. The motion carried. Yale sat very still. Below her, Vrethana gathered his document. The chamber began to move. The soft bureaucratic shuffle of a body that had finished its business and was moving to the next item. An aide appeared at Vrethana's shoulder and handed him something. He looked at it, nodded, walked toward the side door. He glanced up at the gallery once. Yael was looking at her coffee. She was not, she had decided, going to cry in this room. She had promised herself that 9 years ago, and she intended to keep it. Vrethana watched the human woman in the gallery, watched her sit there with her cold cup and her very still hands. He had known Yael Devan for 9 years. She was smart, and she was careful, and she had never in 9 years asked for anything she knew she couldn't have. He had respected that about her. He almost felt something, not regret exactly, a kind of weight that came and went quickly. She stood up, picked up her bag, adjusting the strap the way people do when their hands need something to do. She did not look at the floor, or the delegates, or the platform. She left the coffee on the seat. Vrethana watched her walk out. The door closed behind her without sound. He told himself she was processing. Civilizations processed extinction events in predictable ways. Contraction, noise, sometimes a brief spike in aggression before the quieting. The humans would do the same. The simulations were clear. He went back to his document. He did not think about the coffee she had left behind, the full cup, going cold, abandoned in the empty gallery, like something she had decided she didn't need anymore. He did not think about what that meant. The maintenance corridor smelled like recycled air and something burnt that no one had fixed. It was on sub-level 4 of the conclave station, between a water processing unit and a rack of dead communication panels. Nobody came here. That was why Yael had learned where it was 6 years ago, and why she was here now. She had 17 minutes. Standard security protocol after a Class 9 vote. Communications blackout. All external channels frozen. A full sweep of the station's signal traffic. It took the automated systems 18 minutes to complete the sweep. The blackout activated at the 17-minute mark. She knew this because she had read the security manual. The whole manual. In the original Keth, and in 2 translated versions. She had read it the way you read something you tell yourself is just useful information and nothing else. She had been lying to herself for 6 years. The transmitter was small. It fit in the inner pocket of her jacket, against her ribs. She had carried it there for 4 years. It had become so familiar, she sometimes forgot it wasn't part of her body. Sometimes in the mornings, she would press her hand to her ribs, checking if it was there, and feel something close to relief when it was. She pulled it out now and set it against the dead communication panel on the wall. The panel was dead, but the channel behind it wasn't. She had checked. She had kept checking, every 3 months, for 4 years. The keycard was in her other hand. She turned it over. The edges were worn smooth. It was a standard conclave access card, encrypted to her clearance level. But she had added something to the back panel herself, a line of secondary code that opened a channel the conclave systems logged as maintenance traffic, background noise. the kind of signal the automated sweep marked as checked and moved on from. She had built it slowly, piece by piece, over years. She had told herself the whole time that she would never use it. 12 minutes. She turned the card over again, the smooth edge, the worn corner where she had held it too many times. She thought about a kitchen, a specific kitchen, a specific afternoon when the light came through the window at a particular angle and sat on the floor in a long yellow square. And someone she loved sat in the middle of that square, eating cereal, and the whole world was quiet and close and hers. She stopped thinking about it. She connected the card. The channel opened. The transmitter had one contact loaded. It had had one contact loaded for 4 years. Dr. Kwame Asante, Director of the UN Extraterrestrial Affairs Division, Geneva. She had disagreed with him, professionally, loudly, in written memos and in conference rooms, and once in a hallway, in a way that made 3 assistants find somewhere else to be. He was political where she was blunt. He was careful about things she found it exhausting to be careful about. She trusted him completely. She had never told him why. She was not going to tell him now. She had one shot at the message. Whatever she sent had to survive being read by someone who was about to receive the worst news of his life, and had to be fast enough to clear the channel before the sweep. She typed 11 words. "We have 16 months. They've already started counting. Do something inhuman." She read it back once. She sent it. 8 minutes. She pulled the transmitter free and put it back against her ribs, disconnected the card, put it in her pocket, stood in the maintenance corridor in the recycled air smell, and waited for her hands to stop doing the thing they were doing. They stopped. She walked back up to the main level. Her quarters were on level 6, a small room with a window that looked out at nothing, which was what most windows on the station looked at. She made tea, real tea, from a packet she had brought from Earth 2 years ago, that was almost empty now. She was careful with how much she used each time. She drank it standing at the window. Back at the Conclave Station's monitoring center, which she was not in and could not see, the automated sweep completed its cycle. 17 minutes, 40 seconds. All external channels, frozen. Signal traffic, normal. 1 flag for maintenance traffic on sublevel 4. Logged, cleared. Nothing unusual. Yale finished her tea. She thought about Asante receiving the message. She thought about his face, the way he went very still when he got news he hadn't prepared for. The way his hands would move to his desk and press flat against the surface, like he was checking if the ground was still there. She thought about what he would do after that. She did not know exactly what he would do after that. That was the point. That was why she had sent it to him and not to anyone with a title that started with General or Director of Strategic. Those people would make plans she could predict. Asante would make something she couldn't predict, because he would see it the same way she saw it. Not as a military problem, not as a political problem, but as a human problem. The kind that required a human answer. She had written "do something inhuman," and she had meant it as the highest compliment she knew how to give. Kwame Asante read 11 words on a secure device at 3:14 in the morning, and sat very still for a long time, with his hands flat on his desk. Then he made a call. He did not call a general. 3 days later, the Conclave's monitoring systems registered a small increase in electromagnetic output from Earth. Then, over the following week, a gradual decrease. Then a longer, steadier quiet that the systems flagged as a contraction pattern, the beginning of a fear response. Vreth Anah reviewed the flags in his morning briefing. He approved the observation note and moved on. The monitoring continued. The quiet deepened. Earth went dim the way a fire goes dim when it's being deliberately banked. Controlled, intentional. But that was not a distinction the Conclave systems were designed to make. They measured heat, not intent. They logged the numbers, and the numbers said, contracting. The numbers were wrong, but the numbers didn't know that yet. Yael sat in her room and rationed her tea and waited, and did not let herself go back to the kitchen, the yellow light, the quiet morning. She had sent what she could send. Now it was someone else's turn to be human about it. 6 months after the vote, Earth was quiet in a way that made no sense. Not silent, not dark, just reduced, like a city where someone had turned the volume down. The Conclave's long-range arrays, which had been monitoring the H7 system since first contact 60 years ago, were pulling in less than 20% of the usual signal traffic. Radio output down, orbital movement down. The broad electromagnetic noise of 8 billion people doing 8 billion things had dropped to something almost peaceful. The monitoring team filed their reports. The language in the reports was careful and professional, and said in various ways, "They know." Vrethana read the reports over his morning meal. His seal sat on the table beside him. He turned it over twice without noticing he was doing it. He was not worried. He had seen fear responses before. Species contracted when they received extinction-level information. They stopped broadcasting. It was a biological response, older than language, the ancient instinct to go small and still, and hope the danger passed. It never worked, but species did it anyway. It was almost touching. He set the seal down and went back to his work. 6 light-years away, in a facility that used to have a name, and now had only a number, Admiral Sujin Park stood in front of a wall of names. Not a screen, an actual wall. Someone had printed them, printed and pinned, paper, the old way, and arranged them in columns by location. Station names, ship names, platform names, research base names. Each one had a number beside it. Each number was a person. 4,107 people. 4,107 human beings currently living and working on conclave vessels and stations, spread across the controlled space of 11 civilizations. Researchers, translators, technicians, maintenance workers, diplomatic staff, laborers who repaired things, cooks who had learned to prepare food that non-humans could eat, a woman on a Keth agricultural station who had been fixing irrigation systems there for 9 years, and knew the layout of that station better than anyone alive. Park stood in front of the wall and read the names slowly. She did this every morning. She had started doing it the day Asante called her and read her 11 words over an encrypted line, and waited. She hadn't needed him to say anything else. Park had spent 30 years in submarines. That was the thing people never understood about submarines. They did not win by being powerful. There were ships that were faster, and ships that were larger, and ships that carried more weapons. The submarine did not compete on any of those terms. The submarine was somewhere else entirely, quiet and patient and already in position. And when it acted once, and it acted for keeps. She still read the old manuals at night, the paper ones, from early in her career. The principles hadn't changed in 100 years. They wouldn't change now. The plan had a name. She hadn't come up with it. It had come from somewhere in the logistics division, the way good names always do, sideways, from someone who wasn't trying to be clever, who was just describing the thing accurately. Operation Housekeeper. Her deputy, Colonel Farooq Tashkentov, had smiled when he heard it, the small, tight smile of a man who was afraid, but found the accuracy of the name briefly comforting. Park had not smiled, but she had approved it. The principle was simple. 4,107 human beings were already inside the Conclave's infrastructure. They had been there for years. The Conclave had never thought carefully about this, because the Conclave had never considered humans dangerous yet. Yet, being the word that built the whole plan. No weapons shipments, too visible. No military hardware, no obvious preparations. The Conclave's monitoring systems were watching for exactly those things. What they weren't watching for was a maintenance worker who quietly memorized the location of a ship's navigation relay. A translator who learned which corridor connected to which power junction. A cook who noted over years of quiet observation where the emergency override panels were on a Sen diplomatic cruiser. People who had simply been present, learning, making themselves useful, making themselves invisible by being indispensable. 6 months of retraining, done in small groups, quietly, under the cover of the contracted signal output. The reduced electromagnetic noise wasn't fear. It was focus. Every spare watt of broadcast capacity that wasn't mission essential had been pulled inward, used for the training network, the coordination channels, the 100,000 small conversations that were building something the Conclave couldn't see because it wasn't looking in the right direction. Vrethanah's people were watching the sky. The plan was already in the corridors. At the Conclave Monitoring Center, a junior researcher named Teth Kalan was not watching the sky. He was sitting at a secondary workstation, going through cultural output data from the H7 system, which was the kind of work that got assigned to junior researchers because senior researchers had more important things to do. He had been doing this for 3 months, and he had found something that bothered him. Human cultural output, art, music, written work, recorded media, had gone up. In the same 6-month window, where every other signal was contracting, the internal creative output of the human population had increased by 38%. He checked the numbers 3 times. They were consistent. He pulled every comparative study he could find on contraction phase civilizations. The patterns were clear. When a species contracted in fear, creative output dropped. It made sense. You didn't write music when you were hiding. You didn't make art when you were waiting to die. But the humans were making more. More music, more stories, more of everything that was internal, personal, passed between people rather than broadcast outward. It was as if they had simply redirected, stopped talking to the outside, and started talking to each other, at a volume and a rate that was, if anything, accelerating. Teth Kalan sat with this for a long time. Then he wrote a report. He noted the discrepancy from standard contraction models. He noted that he was not sure what the alternate interpretation was, but that the standard interpretation did not fit. At the bottom he added a line he almost deleted and then did not. I do not think they are crouching. I think they are teaching their young. He filed the report and went back to his data. 3 levels up, the report landed in Vrethanah's queue. Vrethanah's queue was long. He was managing the operational timeline for the suppression fleet, coordinating with 4 member species on logistics, and reviewing a separate study on post-suppression ecosystem recovery timelines. The junior researcher's report was flagged as low priority. He would get to it. Back in her facility, Park finished reading the names, all 4,107. She did it every morning, not for any reason she would have explained to anyone who asked. Just to know them. One by one. The fleet came out of faster-than-light travel, 4 light hours from Earth, and held its position while the sensors ran. 37 ships. The largest the Conclave had ever assembled for a suppression operation, which was a phrase that existed because the Conclave had needed it twice before, and had built language around it the way you build a box around something sharp. Clean language, procedural, the kind that kept the hands steady. The sensor sweep took 8 minutes. The lead analyst on the flagship reported to Fleet Commander Orath Vel, who was Keth, who had studied both previous suppression operations and considered this one, unfortunately, straightforward. No defensive array, the analyst said. No battle stations in orbit. No military vessels in approach formation. Surface readings are normal. A pause. They appear to be undefended. Orath Vel looked at the scan results. He could not have said exactly what. He had learned over a long career to pay attention to things that sat wrong, and he was paying attention now. He just didn't know what he was paying attention to. Begin the approach, he said. The fleet moved. On 11 of those 37 ships, human beings were having ordinary mornings. A woman named Dara Osei was in the engine maintenance bay of the third vessel in the second formation group, the Keth carrier Annihilate, doing what she had been doing every morning for 4 years, running diagnostic checks on the secondary propulsion system. She was good at this. She had been good at it when she arrived, and she had gotten better. The Keth engineers respected her. They brought her problems. She ate meals with them sometimes, and learned the names of their children, and told them about her sister back in Accra. She had not told them what she had memorized over 4 years of walking those corridors. At 6:14 station time, her communicator sent a pulse, not a sound, a vibration, a specific pattern of 3 short and 1 long that she had been waiting 10 months to feel. She set down her tools. She walked to a panel on the wall, the one behind the secondary coolant junction that she had opened 100 times for legitimate reasons, and she opened it now for a different one. On 10 other ships, 10 other people received the same pulse and walked toward panels and junctions and access points they had been learning for years. On the flagship, the second sensor sweep did not complete. The navigation system threw an error. Then, the errors started coming faster than the analyst could log them. Small cascading failures in systems that were not supposed to be connected to each other, but which, it turned out, ran through the same relay junction in sub-level 3 that a human maintenance technician had been servicing for 3 years, and knew, intimately, which wires talked to which. "Navigation is down," the analyst said. Orathvel looked up from his display. "Run the backup." "Backup is..." A pause. "Backup is also down. Life support, decks 4 and 7, functioning, but the environmental controls they're locked. We can't adjust them remotely." Then the communications array went, not destroyed, not damaged, redirected. Every signal the fleet tried to send outward, to the conclave, to the home stations, to the monitoring relays, rerouted. The channel opened onto a single frequency. A recording. Orathvel heard a human voice. It was calm, unhurried, the voice of someone who had thought carefully about what they were going to say, and had said exactly that and nothing more. 11 seconds, then silence. Orathvel stood very still in the way that Vrethana stood still, the trained stillness of a person who had spent decades making decisions, and was now encountering something his decades had not prepared him for. 3 of the 37 ships went fully dark, not destroyed, powered down, full internal shutdown, lights and engines in every broadcasting system, sitting silent in the dark 4 light hours from Earth, like buildings after closing time. They would not respond to hails, they would not move. The remaining 34 held position. They held position because the voice had told them to. At the conclave, Vrethana watched the fleet telemetry go dark, ship by ship. Third vessel in Formation 2. Flagship communications. Both backup relays. One by one, the signals dropped off his monitoring display, and he stood in the operations center with his seal in his hand. He had picked it up without remembering doing it, and watched the display and felt the wrongness of it settle into him like cold water. No weapon signatures. He kept checking. No energy spikes consistent with combat. No hull breaches. No destruction signals at all. The ships were simply contained. His senior analyst turned to look at him. "They're not fighting the fleet," she said. "No," Vrethana said. "They were inside it." He did not answer this. He set the seal down on the console beside him, picked it up again. His hands were doing something his mind was only half in charge of. He thought about the things he knew about humans. The studies, the simulations, the 60 years of contact reports and behavioral analyses, the expansion curves, the weapons development, the volatility projections. He had read all of it. He had based a unanimous vote on all of it. He had not read Teth Kalan's report. He thought of it now. The junior researcher's name appeared somewhere in his memory, attached to a low-priority flag he had not gotten to. He did not know why he was thinking of it. He put it away. His operations team was working, running emergency protocols, trying to reach the fleet through secondary channels, calculating response options. It was professional and efficient, and it was not touching the actual problem, which was not a communications problem or a tactical problem. The actual problem was that the humans had been inside the fleet's ships for years, quietly, usefully, learning the corridors and the junctions and the relay points and the names of their colleagues' children. And no one had thought to ask why they seemed so comfortable there. The 3 dark ships, his analyst said. They're in Earth orbit. Vrethana looked at the display. The 3 silent ships, fully powered down, sitting in orbit around the planet they had come to suppress. Not weapons, not a threat. A reminder. We were here. We are here. We will be here. Vrethana put his seal in his pocket. He did not take it out again. Get me the contact protocol, he said quietly. Sir? The contact protocol. He did not repeat himself a 3rd time. Someone will come to talk to us. That's what the message said. Someone will come to talk. He looked at the display, at the 34 ships holding position, at the 3 dark ones in orbit, at Earth, dim and quiet and completely intact. We should be ready to listen. His analyst went to find the protocol. Vrethana stood at the display for a long moment alone. He picked up the seal, put it down. He thought about Yael Davan leaving the gallery, the full cold coffee sitting on the empty seat. He thought about what it meant to leave something behind like that. He was beginning, slowly and with great difficulty, to understand. 2 months after the fleet, the chamber had windows now. Not real ones. Nobody had torn out walls. But the main display panels had been reconfigured to show the exterior feed. The station, the stars, the long dark beyond the docking arms. Someone had done it quietly, without announcement, after the vote. Vrethana had noticed, and said nothing. Maybe they needed to see the outside now. Maybe they all did. He sat at the head of the table and waited. The other delegates were already in their seats. 11 species, the same chamber, the same curved rows narrowing toward the front. Only now the front held 2 chairs facing each other across a table, and one of those chairs was his, and one was empty. The door opened. Yael Davan walked in. She had aged, slightly, in a way that suited her. She moved through the chamber the way she always had. Not slowly, not quickly, just with the kind of steadiness that belongs to people who have stopped caring whether a room is impressed by their entrance. She sat down across from Vrethana and put a document on the table between them. Then she put a small device beside the document. She folded her hands. Before we start, Vrethana said, I would like to hear the message. She looked at him for a moment. You haven't heard it? I heard 11 seconds of it, he said. My communications team transcribed it. I have read it 4 times. I would like to hear it. Yael reached forward and pressed the device. A voice came out of it. A woman's voice, flat and clear the way deep water is clear. You could see straight to the bottom, and the bottom was further down than you expected. This is Admiral Sujin Park, Earth Defense Unified Command. You have entered a protected system. Your fleet is currently compromised. You have one option. Stand down and wait. Someone will come to talk to you. Listen to them. They've been trying to talk to you for a long time. 11 seconds. Yael stopped the recording. The chamber was quiet. 11 delegations, 1,400 years of collective governance, the longest-running diplomatic body in recorded history, sitting in silence while a human woman's voice finished its 11 seconds, and the room held what it had said. Vrethana looked at the document on the table. This is the audit, he said. Yes. He had been briefed on it. He had not opened it. He reached forward now and did. The first page was a cover summary, dense and organized, citations running down the margins in 3 languages. The second page was a list. 2 civilizations, not names he recognized, designations the old conclave way, P3 and M7, 2 species that had received the same vote, the same designation, the same fleet, before he had been born. The historical record said both suppression operations had been correct. Both projected threats had been valid. The document said 600 survivors of one, 41 of the other. Found in the outer systems, in places without designation, living in ways that the Conclave's expansive definition of civilization would not have counted as civilization. Living anyway. Vrethana turned the page. He read for a long time. No one in the chamber spoke. Yael sat with her hands folded, and waited, and the patience in her waiting was not kind. It was the patience of someone who had been waiting a very long time already, and had learned how to do it without it meaning forgiveness. On the far side of the table, in a chair that technically had no status and no designation, sat a young Keth researcher, Teth Kalan. He had been brought in quietly, at Yel's request, and had spent the trip to the station reading everything he could find about both survivor populations and feeling a weight settle on him that he was too young to fully name, but old enough to carry. He was the only person in the room who had known, who had looked at the data and written a report and named the thing correctly. It had made no difference. He was going to have to figure out how to live with that. Vrethana set the document down. "What you want," he said slowly, "is not to destroy this body." "No," Yel said. "You want to change it. We want to fix what's broken in it." She tilted her head slightly. "It has been running a long time. Long-running things develop errors. The errors compound." She tapped the document. "This is the error. One clause 4,000 years old. Applied 3 times. Applied wrong all 3 times. We think. You think. The simulations you used to justify our vote were accurate about our expansion rate, about our weapons development, about every variable you measured." She paused. "You didn't model what we'd do once we had nothing left. That's not in your data set. Neither of the 2 previous civilizations was anything like us. Your simulations didn't have the reference points. And if they had," she looked at him steadily. "You might have voted the same way," she said. "We don't know. Neither do you. That's the problem with decisions you can't take back." Vrethana was quiet. He had been making decisions for 60 years. He had been right for 60 years, measurably, on record, cited in subsequent conclave governance studies as an example of careful leadership. He was sitting in this room because he had been right for 60 years. He thought about the coffee, the full cup, abandoned. He had been telling himself for 10 months that it was grief, that she had left it in defeat. He understood now that she had not been coming back for it. She hadn't needed it anymore. "The clause," he said finally, "you want it removed." "Yes, the 2 remnant populations, brought in, given seats. Not observer seats." She met his eyes. "Actual seats." He looked at Teth Kalan, who sat very still and looked back at him with the careful expression of someone trying not to be readable. "And him?" "He figured it out," Yael said simply. 6 months before the fleet arrived. He filed a report. The report was correct. He should be somewhere he can be heard. Vrethana looked at the young researcher for a long moment. Then he looked at the device on the table, the small recorder. 11 seconds of a woman's voice that had stopped a fleet. "They've been trying to talk to you for a long time." He thought about 60 years of contact reports. Human delegates in the gallery. Human workers in the corridors. A liaison who knew every custom and every language and every delegate's preference, and had spent 9 years making herself small and useful and present. Not threatening, just there. Every day, Every corridor, every ship. Already in position before anyone thought to call it a position. He stood up. It was not agreement exactly. It was an old man in a very old institution, standing up from a chair that had faced the same direction for 4,000 years, and deciding, in the specific way that only people who are genuinely wrong ever decide, that the direction needed to change. "We will need a committee," he said. "We have one ready," Yael said. Of course she did. She picked up the device and put it in her pocket. She picked up her copy of the document. She stood and gave Rethana a nod that was professional and nothing more, and walked toward the door. She stopped at the maintenance corridor. Not the same one, a different sublevel, but she stopped. The alcove where she had made the transmission was 2 levels below her, behind a dead panel next to a broken water unit. She had walked past it every day for the 10 months since. She had not gone back. She went now. It smelled the same, recycled air, something burnt nobody had fixed, the dead panels, the particular quiet of a place where nobody came. She stood in it for a moment. She had a coffee this time. She had made it fresh, that morning, in the small machine in her room, with the last of the good beans she had been saving for no reason she could name. She drank it. Hot, dark, real. She finished it, standing in the corridor that had, 10 months ago, been the loneliest place she had ever been in her life. It tasted like it was supposed to. It was exactly what she had needed, and she drank it slowly and let it be that and nothing else.